A few years ago, I was looking for a roommate. The vacancy had risen because my previous one was a Swedish guy who had been having some trouble with homesickness. Eventually it got too much and he moved away to somewhere with a colder climate. So, as you do, I put some ads up on various sites and it didn't take long before a guy called Robert responded. We messaged back and forth a couple of times and arranged to meet up one day at Starbucks. I was immediately struck by his easy charm and wit. You couldn't hope to meet a person who was easier to talk to. He was in art school with ambitions of making it big as a painter. How exactly one would go about that, I have no idea, but we had become friends straight away, and I didn't think twice about letting him move in. Just before we parted ways that day, Rob, as he'd insisted I call him, asked a question I really didn't anticipate. "Hey, I know this is a weird question, but, are you by chance afraid of clowns?" He said with a weird smile. I suppose so," I replied, wondering why anyone would ask. "I probably watched Stephen King's It at a stupidly young age. Are you scared of them?" "Oh, damn," he said. "I'm a clown on the weekends. I do like charity events and fundraisers, visit sick kids in hospitals sometimes. Is that a problem for you? I mean, I know some people are seriously afraid of clowns." "Oh, of course not. That sounds cool. It's just the bad clowns that scare me, you know." I had never personally known one before, but Rob didn't seem scary. "I promise, I don't kill kids," he said with a grin. He threw his neck back and drained the last of the coffee from the cup. "It's the adults I go for." I burst out laughing at his dark sense of humor. What a cool guy, I thought. I'm actually going to be looking forward to this new roommate situation. Our first few weeks living together went about as smoothly as possible, and things were a good deal more peaceful than they had been with my previous roommate. I definitely didn't miss being woken up at unholy hours by his sobbing. Rob would get up, go to class, come home, and paint or have a quick drink with a friend or two. Sometimes on the weekend he'd put on his clown suit and go out to those charity events that he talked about. He didn't seem like a scary clown. He was so cool, in fact, that he even began to change my view of clowns. There was a freezer in our kitchen that I told Rob not to bother using. It hadn't been right since before he moved in. I kept meaning to call someone to come out and look at it or replace it, but I guess it must have slipped his mind. One day, about 5 months after Rob moved in, I came home to find the lights on but total silence in the house. That was strange. Rob was always watching TV or playing his guitar. He hated silence. But I really knew something was up when I noticed something different about that freezer. The freezer door was open. I walked over, looked inside. Oh my God. 8 chunks of a human body, all cut up neatly and stored tidily on the shelves. I can't really explain how I felt in that moment. I panicked. What the hell can you do in that situation? My mind was racing, and I thought back to the day we met Rob, and he made that joke about only killing adults. Holy shit. Just then, a faint shuffling noise came from Rob's room. I didn't know what to do. For some reason, I tiptoed over to his room to see what the hell was happening. I don't know. I suppose adrenaline just takes over at that point. I peered in, and sure enough, there he was, lying on the floor with a mad look in his eyes as he stared at the ceiling. After a long delay in which I'm sure he was aware of my presence, he looked up at me. "You sick bastard! I'm calling the police." Clowns are the worst roommates, don't you think? Always uncovering the dead bodies in places you specifically told them not to look. I'm afraid I had to kill him too. So now my old Swedish friend has a dorm partner to sleep along with him in that big freezer. Oh, by the way, I'm still looking for a new roommate, if anyone's interested.
I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up, and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there, with a clipboard, and he said that he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived. So I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room. The typical girly room with pink and glitter. Thankfully, my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, then who is that? I said, "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s, and obviously we weren't going back into the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then, my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house, and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meter upstairs." And just like she had hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very nice. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge, and she worried that she would be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone, and authorities found the door open, and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out, we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad that we were okay. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say that she had been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man. But fear not, he was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s. So in any case, he has to be dead by now. I'm just so thankful every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action.
I got out of work at 6:30 p.m. and went to McDonald's to get an iced coffee. I pulled up to the drive-thru and there was a red truck in front of me with no cap on the bed. It's super wide, so I can't see the mirrors and thus can't get a glimpse of who is inside. I'm minding my own business when I noticed that the red truck had pulled up to the second pickup window. I didn't think anything of it, and just assumed they had a big order, and the McDonald's employees asked them to pull up so I could get my iced coffee from the first window. That's when I look up, and I see the truck's reverse lights come on. Okay, they must have pulled a little too far, and are backing up a little. No big deal. They keep backing up, without signaling at all to me. I slowly back up too. Luckily, there was no one behind me. They keep going until they're finally at the first pickup window. The McDonald's employee looks out the window at me, shrugs, and gives me a look like they were just as confused as me. A few minutes goes by. At this point, I'm just thinking about how strange and not a part of common etiquette it was to back up without signaling to anyone that you needed to do so. They could have easily hit me had I not been looking straight ahead. Now, about another 5 minutes goes by. No one is being given any food. I just wanted my iced coffee, and I'm starting to get a little annoyed that they backed up, thinking maybe they were told to go to the second window since I only needed the coffee, but they suddenly felt like refusing to do so would get McDonald's to get them their food faster, and thus they backed up to the first window. I honestly don't know. Anyways, I continue to sit there and wait for my food when I see the driver's side door to the truck open. Out comes a man, like 30 or 40 years old. He was wearing light khaki-colored overalls and a dirty white shirt. He starts walking slowly over to my car. I'm thinking, okay, maybe he's just going to apologize to me for not signaling when he needed to back up. He gets to my passenger door window, turns so he's facing the window head-on, and just stares at me. I'm waiting for him to signal to put my window down, thinking he had something to say, but he doesn't do anything. He just stands there and stares. That's when he starts to lift his hand to the door handle. I quickly lock the door. He immediately starts screaming and continues to attempt to open my now locked door. Not like an angry scream, more like a mentally unstable scream. The guy then goes from trying to open my door to attempting to break my window with his elbow. At this point, I want to drive away, but there was now a car behind me waiting in the drive-thru. I'm too close to both the cars in front of me and the car behind me to be able to drive off. Thinking quickly, I turn off my car, take the keys, and run inside the McDonald's in hopes he doesn't follow me. All the McDonald's employees saw this going down, and when they saw me running inside, they let me hide in the back until the man just leaves. The guy then proceeds to check all the cars in the parking lot to see if they were locked. We instantly called the police, and they were able to detain the guy. It turns out, the guy recently escaped from a mental hospital nearby and stole the car he was driving. The guy was carrying 3 different knives with him when the police detained him. Overall, this experience still scares me to this day. I'm just glad I was able to react fast enough to lock my door before he could open it and do who knows what.
Last year, the day after 4th of July, I went to my favorite lake to go fishing. Occasionally, I would take friends, but more often than not, I went alone. Unless you're fishing in the dark, nothing creepy really ever happens, and you would never expect something creepy to happen either. I went to a very specific spot on the lake where I have always had good luck catching fish. The sun was out, and it was peaceful. Nobody else in sight. That's what I really love about this lake. It wasn't too popular like some others I have been to. I was listening to an Audible book when suddenly, without hearing him at all, a man floats by in a little rowboat. I looked over at him, and he is stereotypically creepy, smiling at me and didn't say a word. To break the awkward silence, I said, "Hey, I didn't see you there," and then let out a fake little laugh. The man said nothing and just floated by. I brushed it off as he was leaving my immediate vicinity, but was once again taken by surprise when he turned around about 20 yards away and began heading towards me again. He was rowing, so it was gradual, but man, I cannot tell you the creepy feeling that came over me. I thought for sure that he would say something this time, or do something, but he floated by and said nothing once again. I have a short temper, and I got a little pissed off and said, "Do you need something, bro?" He just smiled at me. After that, I had had enough. "Dude, get the hell away from my boat." He stood up and continued his disrespectful stare. After just standing there looking at me like an idiotic psycho, he picked up the small anchor he had on his piece of crap little boat and tossed it behind him into the dark lake. I immediately stood up and started reeling in my line. A few seconds later, I put my pole down and started my motor. I looked at him one more time before I blasted away, and this guy was still smiling. I flipped him off and was gone in seconds. Well, that kinda ruined my mood, and I felt pissed off and creeped out, so I decided to call it a day. I have been to that lake 100 times since, and have never seen that guy again. And I better not either. I might just punch him in the face. I have no idea what his deal was, if he was annoyed that I was fishing in a spot that he liked, or if he was picking a fight. I have no idea. Thinking back on it, though, the whole thing was stupid, and honestly, creepy as hell.
The 80s were a crazy time in my life. I'm not proud to admit that I was a major drug addict back then. I've since reformed and I've turned my life around. I've been sober since 1990. This story was my wake-up call, and the main reason that I left that life behind. Back then, I was working as a window washer in Birmingham, Alabama. I lived in a small apartment just outside the city. In those days, a lot of contraband came through there, and I was kinda sorta friends with my dealer. We'll call him Chris. I've known Chris since high school. He was always a bad seed, and had a criminal record the length of my arm, which is to be expected in this line of business. We had a sort of standoffish relationship. He tried several times to get me to hang out with him at parties, and go to bars and whatnot, but I always declined because I never fully trusted him. However, as my addiction became worse, I began to let my guard down more and more. It was on a Friday night. I remember this clearly because I had just gotten paid, and being the pathetic addict I was, I called up Chris as soon as I cashed my check.
Hello.
Hey Chris, it's Richie. Are we good for a meetup?
Yeah, I need you to meet me somewhere else tonight.
Why?
Because I don't want to get busted selling this shit to you in the same fucking place over and over again. The police came and knocked on my door this morning, accusing me of slinging dope.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah, and it's a good thing I don't keep my stash in my house, or I would have been fucked. But they are watching me, and I think someone is running their mouth.
Chris, I'd never...
Look, just shut up and drive out to the abandoned church. Be there by 7.
Chris abruptly hung up. The church Chris referred to was located roughly 30 minutes outside the city, towards Kohlberg. I had only been there once back in high school when a mutual friend of ours had a keg party there. I thought he was overly paranoid, wanting to meet me all the way out there, but I had to play by his rules since he was the one with the supply. I made the drive out there, and was sitting in my truck outside the abandoned church, which was nothing but a heap of charred remains barely standing. That party I mentioned took place in 1981, so someone took it upon themselves to torch the place since then. This was before cell phones, so I pretty much just sat there and listened to the radio while I waited for Chris to show up. I looked at the clock on my dashboard and saw that almost an hour had gone by since I arrived, and there was still no sign of Chris. It was now dark out as well, which was making me feel uneasy. This church was off of a back road near Interstate 22, which was practically in the middle of nowhere. There were no streetlights or anything out there. It was when I was thinking about how if anyone was outside, the only thing that they would see is my truck's cab light, that I started to feel like a sitting duck. I tried starting up my truck to get out of there, but my dumbass had nearly drained the battery by sitting there with my radio on. As I tried turning the engine over, I got the feeling that eyes were watching me, and I turned on my headlights. I looked up, and a wave of dread overcame me as my headlights illuminated a horrifying sight. Standing in front of my truck were 3 figures. The first thing that my mind was able to register was a pair of antlers on top of a deer head, and for a split second, I thought maybe a trio of deer were standing in front of my truck. But as I looked closer, I saw the figures were standing upright, and I came to the horrifying realization that what I was looking at were 3 men dressed in deer skins. I began to panic and started to turn the key in the ignition. I didn't know who these deer skin wearing freaks were, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. As the sound of the engine failing to start rang out, I watched in terror as the 3 figures began to move closer. "Come on, you piece of shit!" I yelled as I slammed my foot on the gas pedal while continuing to try and start my truck. With each attempt, the headlights flickered, and as the figures slowly closed in, I could see that the middle one was holding a shotgun. I closed my eyes and began to pray for God to help me out of this situation while pressing down on the gas pedal. Suddenly I heard the sound of the engine roaring to life. I didn't have time to be relieved, as I quickly threw the vehicle into reverse and hauled ass. I looked up to see the deer people were much closer than they had been before, but that's not what scared me. What scared me was the shotgun pointed directly at me. Not a second later, I heard a gunshot, and I felt a hard thud as one of my headlights was blown out. I did not stop the truck as I quickly backed out to the back road, and then floored it all the way back to town. When I got back home, I immediately called Chris, but there was no answer. The next day I drove out to Chris's trailer and knocked on his door, but no one came. I didn't know what to make of the situation, and I decided to call out of work for a week and lay low. Chris was found 2 weeks later, on the side of a road about 15 miles away from that abandoned church. He had been bludgeoned to death. I came to the police with my story and told them about what happened to me, but the death of a known drug dealer wasn't exactly a priority for them. They did, however, try to get me to confess to killing Chris multiple times, even after I showed them the damage to my truck. I could see the writing on the wall. The police were too lazy to investigate the case, so they tried to pin it on me, using my drug addiction to support their bullshit theory. They harassed me with parking tickets and stakeouts until I finally moved away a year later. I still have no idea who those dear people were, but I'm convinced that they were the ones who killed Chris. My guess is that Chris got to the church before I did, and they ambushed him. To this day, I'm grateful to be alive. The moral of the story is that you should stay away from drugs. Not only will they destroy your life, but they will also put you into dangerous situations like this one. If I were to give this story a title, I'd call it Scared Straight.
The following story happened when I was 16, and still to this day, I reflect on it from time to time. A bit of background. I live in Australia, and live reasonably close to a Royal National Park, where this story takes place. If you aren't familiar with the park, it is a large area over 100 kilometers in space, with winding roads and nothing but brushland that are quite fun to drive through. On a night like any other, I was doing just that. I was a passenger in my friend Ash's car, and my brother Lucas was with us. It was approximately 1 a.m., and we were driving deeper into the park as we had done hundreds of times before. As we came quickly around a bend in the route, we were face to face with a girl standing at the edge of the road, close to one of those barriers, as we must be near a cliff. She looked to be in her teens. Her age I couldn't be 100% sure. Though this sounds cliché, I swear she was wearing some kind of white dress and was pale-faced. I am an avid horror movie fan, so I understand how this all sounds. Her immediate appearance wasn't what was concerning to us. We had stopped virtually in the middle of the road, and the car's headlights were shining directly on her. We became uneasy when the girl did not blink, flinch, or move a muscle, despite facing us directly. I remember wondering why she would be out here standing in the pitch-black night. I can't remember if my brother or our friend suggested it, but someone said, "Should we go see if she needs help?" In that moment, so many questions were racing through my mind. I think I was the first to speak and said no, firmly. As much as I wanted to help someone, I reasoned with the boys, saying that if she was in trouble and needed help, she would have indicated it by now. I also suggested that it could be some kind of trap used to distract us, and someone could be nearby to attack us if we aided her. After what felt like hours, though really, it was only a minute, we got the hell out of there. We had to drive past her to continue our route, and couldn't do a U-turn or a three-point turn, because the road was too narrow. As we drove past her, I was in the back seat and turned my head to watch her. I still get chills when I think about this, but that girl's head turned slowly in sync with the car's movements and watched us drive away. I kept my eyes on her, and still she did not blink or move as the light around her started to dim until she was in the darkness once again, and I could no longer see her face. Oddly enough, the three of us didn't mention it the next day or for a very long time. At least I don't remember having a conversation about it with Lucas. It was only a few years later, when I had started to question if I had dreamed it, when I asked my brother and our friend if they remembered that night. To my horror, and somewhat relief, they did. They recalled the details as I had recalled them, so I knew it was real. Over the years I have wondered what became of her. I regret not going to the police, and you may ask why I would even go to the police if she had done nothing wrong. Truth be told, there are no residents that deep in the park, and she was a good hour's walk or so from the nearest highway. I have gone back to the park several times since, specifically to try to find the girl or see if there would be a common occurrence. I have researched online for any clues as to who she might have been. On one drive when I was searching, I said to a friend of mine, Nick, who was happy to come along, that there could be bodies in the brush, and no one would know. A week after I said this, the dead body of a man was found a few feet away from the road in the brush by a motorist who had stopped to relieve himself. It was in the news, and it makes me wonder, how many people are out there in that park? But most of all, who was that girl that we saw that night?
My first job was at McDonald's. This building was attached to a gas station and located off of a busy highway. I was 16 and started a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. This early, the store was usually empty, so only 3 people, myself included, were in the restaurant. These people were my manager, who was in the back, the cook, who was also in the back, and myself, the cashier, who was up front. I was wiping down the counter when a man who looked to be in his mid-30s or early 40s came in. He didn't order anything, but went straight to the restrooms, which were in the restaurant area just around the corner from my cash register. Many truckers and travelers would come in simply to use the washrooms and leave, so this was not an uncommon occurrence. I didn't think much of it, but after the man finished, he came up to the counter and said, "Excuse me, I just used the washroom, and one of the toilets is overflowing." I immediately came around the counter and let him lead me towards the restrooms. Suddenly, I got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and stopped dead in my tracks. I became very aware that no one was in the restaurant area, and the only other 2 people in the store were in the back and wouldn't be able to hear me if I went into the restroom. I felt this overwhelming sense of being lured in. The man had the restroom door open and realized I had paused. He said, "Come on in, I'll show you," which came off innocently enough, but it didn't sit well with me. I smiled and said, "I'll get my manager," and I started making my way back to the counter. "It'll only take a minute," he called out. I met my manager in the back and explained to him that a man was complaining about an overflowing toilet. My manager went to check it out, and I followed closely behind him. When we turned the corner, the man was gone, and we entered the restroom. No toilet was overflowing. We exchanged a look and never brought it up again. As we were leaving the washroom, I glanced into the parking lot, and I saw a car driving away. It was the man. He gave me a terrifying death stare as I drove off. To this day, I don't know what gave me that feeling to not follow the man into the restroom, but I'm glad I stopped to think about what I was doing. The whole situation only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I was young and trusting, and this man could have done who knows what, and I wouldn't have been hurt. He could have left, got away with whatever it was he had planned, and hit the highway.
I'm 22 years old, and this happened about 2 years ago when I was still living at my grandparents' house. This was the only scary experience that has ever happened to me, and it was a doozy. My cell phone was on the nightstand next to my bed and started ringing. It was like 3 a.m. To my surprise, the number calling me was the house phone, as in the phone downstairs. I answered, thinking that maybe one of my grandparents had hurt themselves, but when I said hello, I got no response. I again said, "Hello, Grandma, Grandpa," but again, nothing. That's when fear really hit me. I crept down the stairs, and they were really old stairs. They creaked. The whole house was dark, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't petrified of what I would find. The house phone that called me was in the kitchen, and as I reached the bottom step, I was still holding my cell phone to my ear, and whoever was on the other line was still there. I could hear them breathing lightly. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, my heart beating out of my chest. I switched on the light, and to my relief, nobody was standing there. But at the same time I realized that they must be somewhere else in the house. Or maybe the phone somehow malfunctioned and called the last number dialed or something? No, it was someone in my house. How did I know? Because suddenly they started laughing through the phone. I could tell it was a woman. It was my grandma. I ran upstairs to my grandparents' room, and it was locked. I could hear my grandma hysterically laughing through the bedroom door and through the phone. Panic hit me. I kicked the door open and immediately saw my grandpa shaking my grandma as she sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone in her hand and laughing maniacally. I have never in my life seen or heard my grandma laugh like that, but it was horror movie material. She abruptly then stopped as she woke up. Both of my grandparents completely brushed it off and told me to go back to bed. But it was so insanely scary that I almost wanted to scream at them. The next morning was like any other. My grandma made me pancakes, and when I asked her about the sleepwalking or whatever she was doing the night before, she just casually said, "It happens once in a blue moon." I told her what happened exactly, beat by beat, and she responded, "Oh my, that sounds so scary." Yes, Grandma. That's a freaking understatement.
So, basically, my boyfriend and I live in a flat together, and he's an area manager for a main chain restaurant in England. His job takes him to at least 5 to 8 stores, and sometimes he has to stay late. Sometimes he doesn't get in until around 3 a.m, so I usually sort of wait up for him to make sure he's alright, if he wants me to run him a hot bath, and if he wants a coffee or anything. So, I get the usual phone call from him saying, "I'm on my way home. I'll be home in an hour. If I drop call you when I'm closer, can you get a bath running for me, please?" I say sure and hang up. Now, our block of flats has this security door that always gets locked at 10 p.m, and as long as you have a main entry key, you're free to come and go without worrying about the door. I'm nestling down to watch some Netflix, with a cup of tea and a cheeky biscuit, when I hear our buzzer to our flat go off. Now, someone outside the main entrance is pressing my number, and I have to press a switch from the inside of my flat that will open the main security door and let them in. I think to myself, it's probably just someone who's forgotten their key and pressed my number quickly. I try to shrug it off. I pause the film I'm watching, and I wait. The buzzer rings again, stops, and then rings again. It sounds like someone is deliberately putting their finger on it and holding it down. Now, our flat is on the second floor, and from our bedroom, we can look down and see who's at the main gate. I jump up, go into the room, and slowly peek to see who's there. I saw 5 well-built, stocky men. This is 2 a.m. What the hell are they doing here? Why the hell are they ringing my buzzer? It suddenly becomes clear to me that whoever they were, they clearly didn't live here, because they didn't have a key. While peeking at them, I clearly see the front guy put his hand up and press my buzzer. Flat number 4. He's not even touching the other buttons, just mine. Half of me wants to pick up my flat phone and be like, seriously, get lost. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I will call the police. And then the other half of me doesn't want to give away that I'm a girl. It sounds silly, but I'm 23 and I'm quite small. I grab my phone and I ring my boyfriend straight away. He says something like he's 45 minutes away and will be there as soon as possible, but he will call his dad, Luke, who's a policeman, to come over and wait with me. While I'm on the phone, the buzzer is still going. He tells me to just keep peeking at them and to see if I can make out any distinguishing features. After what seemed like ages, my boyfriend's dad turns up, and I see him walk straight up to the guys and start a conversation. My boyfriend's dad already has a security key. We gave him one in case we were ever locked out, and he opens up the door to my flat. Straight away, he runs over to me and makes sure I'm fine. We're sitting down, having a cup of tea, and I ask him what was said and what was happening outside. He says he walked up to the main door, and the conversation went like this. They said to him, "Hey man, do you live here? Do you think you could let us in?" Luke replied with, "Well, clearly if you don't have a key, you don't live here, so no. Who are you supposed to be seeing?" "Well, my main girl lives in number 4, and she's gone to sleep. You know how late it is. These are my friends, and they don't have anywhere to stay, and I haven't got a key. So, how about you let us in?" That's funny, because my daughter lives there. "Oh yeah? Shit, dude. Well, how about letting us in, and we can go and see her together?" Luke said, "Right. Now I don't know what you're planning to do, but seriously, stay the fuck away from these flats. You clearly don't live here. If you ever come here again, I will personally arrest each and every one of you wankers. Now fuck off and go home, because I swear to God I will beat the shit out of you guys so bad, no one will recognize you." And with that, the group of guys took off, and Luke managed to open the door freely and get in.
This happened just last night. I live in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, and my older cousin Odo and I were driving back home from the Home Depot in town, traveling at about 50 miles an hour, down a long stretch of road with fields on either side. And I'm not joking when I say that clowns started appearing out of the tall grass to our left, at least 9 or 10 of them, each of them looking at us. They all put out their arms and acted like they were going to grab the truck. I was at the wheel, and Odo called out, "Holy shit, really?" As we began driving past a few of them, one of the clowns, either because he was more daring than the others, or just couldn't see very well in his mask, got way too close to the road, and I hit the brakes, not to stop the car but to slow it down. When they saw us slowing down, they made to rush the truck. Alarmed that they were suddenly swarming us, I instinctively hit the gas again. I slammed the front right side of the truck directly into one of them, knocking him down against the pavement. Immediately all the other clowns started yelling and cursing, not really making to help their friend, but instead smashing their fists against the outside of the truck. Odo told me to put it in park, which I did, and he pulled a handgun from under the passenger seat. It was my uncle's gun, but I knew for a fact that it wasn't loaded because the firing pin was broken, and the gun wasn't able to fire. He rolled down the window and pointed the gun directly at one of the clowns. The clowns immediately backed off. Then he yelled, "Give me a reason!" For a moment, there was just silence as the clowns backed away a few steps, but not enough for me to hit the gas and safely floor it out of there. Odo gestured to the clown on the pavement. "Is he all right?" The clown on the ground started crawling with his hands and knees and was shuffling away. Another clown carefully helped him to his feet. "Make a space." Otto gestured with the gun to the clowns in front of the truck, and they immediately parted. I put the car into drive and slowly started edging forward. "We have a dash cam, so don't bother calling the cops." Otto kept the gun pointed at all of them until we were far enough away, then rolled the passenger window back up. Seeing all those clowns clumped in the middle of the road in my rearview mirror was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. Otto placed the gun back under the seat before muttering that he hoped that the headlight wasn't cracked. When we got home, we opened some beers and watched Game of Thrones, and didn't even bring it up to my uncle when he got home. We didn't actually have a dash cam, but figured that there was no way for the clowns to know that for certain. I hope they learned something from this, because next time, I don't plan on hitting the brakes.
Back when it was originally released, I really wanted to get my hands on a new Xbox One X. You know the one. It was 4K ready with a considerably faster processor. So naturally, I tried absolutely everything in my power to get one as immediately as I could. My local Walmart was having one of those Black Friday sales, and like so many others, I stood patiently in line, waiting to try and beat the rush to grab one. But I was nowhere near sprightly or fortunate enough to actually get one that way. So after failing to get one in person, I then tried getting one online. But as rapidly as I wanted one to own, the users who were reselling them were asking way too much money, and I simply couldn't afford to shell out double, or sometimes triple the price. After weeks of trying to find a way to get a hold of one, I had to come to the conclusion that it just wasn't to be. It was then that I had something of a stroke of luck. Although I had resorted to Craigslist in my desperation, I did actually find someone that was selling their Xbox One X at no more than the original buying price of the console. Naturally, I was skeptical. For the life of me, I simply couldn't fathom why they would do something like that, but one thought overrode all others. If I didn't put in a bid now, someone else would, and I could kiss my chance of owning a One X goodbye. I immediately emailed the seller and let them know that I was very interested. Not only that, but I had the cash on hand and was ready to go. I also offered to pay for gas or whatever it would take to get the console delivered to my door. I figured that would be a pretty appealing offer to someone who I guessed was just strapped for cash around the holidays. I was stunned to get an almost instantaneous response, stating that they did still have the Xbox and were in fact still waiting for a proper bid from a serious buyer. They politely asked for a delivery address so they could bring it over as soon as possible. I was sort of hesitant to divulge such personal information and asked if it would be a better idea to first meet in public, since it was much safer that way. I'll be honest, I wasn't too pleased with the idea of a total stranger coming over to my house, but he informed me that he was going to be very busy running holiday errands all day and that there would only be some pretty specific windows of opportunity to drop it off. It would be much more convenient for him if he was about to come over to my house. I was still not particularly ecstatic about the idea, but, oh man, I really wanted that new 4K Xbox. So in the end, I agreed and texted the dude my home address. I figured it was safer than me going over to his place. At least this way I'd be on home turf. I was so happy and eager to get my hands on that new console, and that excitement only grew as I began waiting for the guy to turn up. But he took his sweet time. I mean, hours and hours passed by before I began to suspect that he wasn't going to actually show. Around 1 in the afternoon, 4 hours after he was due, I was seriously losing my cool, thinking it was a prank or something. I tried texting the guy back, asking him where he was. Previously, I had gotten pretty timely responses from the guy, but this time I didn't hear a single thing from him. By 6 that evening, I just lost all hope. I assumed that he got a better offer from someone else and didn't have the heart to tell me he picked a new buyer. I was disappointed, more than words can possibly describe. I got myself so psyched, and I can't even tell you how deflated I was. It's one thing not to have gotten the item from the store. I could come to terms with that. But I was so close to having one in my hands, it sucked having my hopes dashed so cruelly like that. And that didn't mean I'd given up entirely. So for the rest of the night, I kept looking around on Craigslist and other sites to find a new Xbox One X that was within my price range. But as I was getting ready to wind down for bed, I heard something. At first I had dismissed it as the wind or something, that it was maybe just my imagination. But then I heard it again. Someone knocking. Not at my front door, but lightly on the TV room window. I walked up to the bedroom window and peered out into the driveway, seeing this strange-looking dude at my front door, looking around as if checking the coast is clear. I'm suspicious, but I go downstairs to see what he wants. He identified himself as the guy who had the Xbox, apologized for being so late, and explained he had gotten backtracked with errands during his day. Then he casually asked if I still had the money. I opened the door all the way, but still kept the screen door closed as a precaution. Something just didn't feel right, like at all. I told him that, yeah, I still had the cash on me, but I didn't see that he had anything with him, so I calmly asked if he had brought the Xbox with him, like if it's still in his car or anything. As expected, he told me it was out in his van. He told me to get the money and come out to the van with him, and he would get it for me. I let him know that I wasn't really comfortable walking out to his van, but he seems to understand and tells me it was all good. I briefly look over the guy's shoulder and see that there is in fact someone else sitting there in the van. Not only that, but the dude at my door has been keeping his hands concealed in the little front pouch of his hoodie the whole time while talking to me, and there was definitely something more than just his hands in there. Don't ask me how I could tell. I just could. You know when you just get a gut feeling about something? Yeah, that. I tried to stay as chill as possible, as I lied to him that I'd just go fetch my wallet and return in a minute. His mood immediately changed as I closed the door in his face before locking it. I then make the split-second decision, better to be safe than sorry, so I pull my phone out of my shorts and dial 911. But as I do, I heard a loud thud on my front door, then the sound of the van's engine revving before it zooms off into the night. When I went to check and see if he had damaged my door, I nearly peed my pants when I saw a rusty old hatchet buried in the wood. I was right that he had something in his sweatshirt, and that I shouldn't go out to the van with him. Be careful who you're buying from, folks. You never know who's behind the username. I witnessed someone end their life at McDonald's. It happened a couple of years ago, and I don't really like to think about it too much. I thought sharing my story with people online would make it a little easier, so here it is. This is kind of my attempt to make peace with the situation, and I hope that the soul of this poor man is resting in peace. I don't remember a lot of the details. It all seems really fuzzy, like it was all just a bad dream that never should have happened. I do remember some stuff, though. I remember it was raining. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. I remember that I had just finished working overtime, so it was pretty late. I wanted to grab a quick bite to eat, but didn't feel like eating in my car. I always hate doing that, especially because of the smell, so I went in. I got a Big Mac from McDonald's. I was sitting in the corner of the store when I noticed a really tall man walk inside. He was dressed in standard winter clothes and had a long blue hat on. There was a lot of empty space inside of the hat on top of his head, and I don't remember exactly why it caught my attention. I watched him for a few minutes. I wasn't particularly interested. I was just sitting there eating and didn't really have anything else to look at. My phone was dead, and he was the only other customer in McDonald's at the time. His body language stood out to me, though. I could tell that he was not in a good frame of mind. I mean, looking at this guy for a minute told you everything you needed to know about him. He was suffering and in a lot of pain. I'm not sure exactly what kind of pain. I could only make guesses. Maybe his wife had left him. Maybe his kids died. I'll never know what happened to him. All I will ever know is that it was bad enough to push him to the very edge, and enough to make him jump off. He stood in front of the cashier for a few minutes while he appeared to be looking at the menu. To this day, I don't know if he was actually considering ordering anything or if he was just waiting for the right moment to. So this was the layout of the store. On one side of the McDonald's, there was the counter where people could order their food, but the counter area didn't take up the entire wall. There was a separation between that and a small hallway that brought you to the bathrooms. I was on the other side of the McDonald's looking on. He had been standing there for a few minutes when he randomly decided to start walking down the hallway. He moved really slowly, like he was really trying to take his time. Step by step, he came closer and closer to death. And the weirdest part about the whole situation was that he didn't seem sad. Didn't feel like he was depressed. It was more of an apathy, like he had suffered so much that he just didn't care anymore, couldn't bring himself to bother with being alive. I don't know, maybe I just feel that way after having thought about this experience so much over the last few years. As he continued down the hallway, he got slower with each step, finally coming to a halt in front of the men's bathroom. He stood there for about 45 seconds. I'm not sure what he was planning on doing. My first reaction was that there was some kind of sign in front of the men's bathroom that it was closed, but that wasn't the case. I saw him pull something out of his coat pocket. He very slowly pointed it at his head. It was a pistol. It wasn't until I heard the gunshot that it registered what was happening. I saw blood go all over the place. His body fell to the floor with a thud. I screamed. I didn't know what else to do. I remember vomiting everything I had just eaten on what was left of my meal. If I hadn't been so disturbed, I would probably have been extremely grossed out, but I was in an absolute state of shock. I started speaking with one of the employees after a few minutes had gone by. He screamed what had happened. I told him that he pulled a gun out of his pocket and shot himself with it. One of the employees there was convinced that he had been shot by someone else, strongly hinting that it was me. I didn't quite understand why they thought so. Some disgruntled old woman, she was old, and told the police that she didn't think that the guy ended his own life. Whatever her motivation was, it really didn't matter. The police didn't take her very seriously from the start, and this obviously was done by his own doing. The security tapes proved as much. I'm not going to lie. It really bothered me that she had to make an already bad situation worse. I already answered some of the questions from the police officers about the story. I remember driving home that night. I remember how alone I felt. This had really taken a toll on me. I pray for that guy's soul every day. I really hope he's in a better place. I can't imagine how horrible things must have been for him that he would have offed himself in a public place like that. I haven't eaten out since this whole experience. I have the strange fear that I'm going to witness another one in public like that. I know it's not rational, but I definitely feel that way. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why this happened, and I probably never will.
I got this great job working at a hospital. I really got to do something that I enjoy. Taking care of others has always been a passion of mine, but I work on one of the hardest floors, the cancer floor. We always have the same patients, and not a whole lot of them make it. This makes my job hard in a lot of ways. You could probably guess that I've seen my fair share of death since I started here. Anyway, I work the night shift, and at night it can be a little creepy when you have to go to the morgue. One night, me and a coworker were taking someone down to the morgue. Now, let me explain. Our morgue is a little freezer box that is in the basement, and it smells horrible. Plus, it has a ramp to get into it. So she and I wheel the body down there, and we push it up the ramp. And then we begin to argue over who is going to push the body inside. Of course, I lose, so I swing the freezer door open, and I push in the body. Then I slam the door shut. We start to fill out our paperwork when we both look up at each other. She says to me, "Did you hear that?" I said, "I think so." We both turn and look at the door. The two of us got cold chills, and the hairs on our arms were standing straight up. It sounded like someone was crying. We froze, turned, and looked at each other, then ran out. Halfway down the hall, she asked if I really heard what she did, and I told her yes. I really didn't know what to think, so I was telling one of my friends who was a nurse on our floor the story. She tells me that she has had similar things happen to her in the morgue. To this day, I will not go alone, and I always try to get out of going at all. We also have a tradition on our floor that when someone passes away, we open the window so the soul of that person is not trapped in the hospital to roam. I'm not making this up. It truly happened. If you don't believe me, I don't care. I know, and so does everyone else who works there.
I have worked at 4 different hotels. One of my owners once told me that any hotel over 10 years old will have had deaths in it. The only hotels that don't are because they are brand new. So I started asking the others on my call-arounds. Every hotel in my area had at least 1 death in the past 3 years, if not more. If it's had deaths, then 100% are haunted, and 100% of older hotels are guaranteed to be haunted. In my 6 years, I worked shift for 2 deaths at different hotels. 1 natural, 1 worse. My ex worked at a hotel with 1 room that was never rented and used as storage because it was the site of a well-known serial killer double homicide back in the 60s. Deaths in hotels are not rare. I do not subscribe to the death equals haunted formula. Of my hotels, only 1 acted haunted in my time there. I was strictly night shift, sometimes 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., sometimes 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. At 11 p.m. I would get to lock all the doors and deal with people through a night window. I love this, as I generally dislike people, but I am good at acting the part of wonderful customer service employee. Hospitality is my middle name, but after 11 p.m. I got to close off my domain of lobby/office, front desk, and breakfast room, all combined, and be left alone till breakfast. So I think that's all the setup I need for you to know about my private little kingdom, under lock and key, where all this takes place during my solo hours. A few weeks into my job, I was scrolling on my phone and bam, the breakfast room doors thundered, then rattled to a stop like they'd been kicked by a mule. I glanced at my security camera, which focuses on those doors. Nothing there. I rewind a few seconds. Nothing, so I go a bit further. Still nothing. A full minute back and rewatch it till the moment I see myself jump on office cam. Nothing. The doors don't even move. But I've heard kids slam those double French doors. That's what they sound like. That's where the noise came from. I walked around the office, lobby, and breakfast room, peering out the windows 'cause maybe I'd heard a car wreck. Nothing. I check my bucket. Nobody is in the room above my office or breakfast rooms. These are often the ones we sell last at the morning activity, or me playing music for myself at night, and it sometimes disturbs people. This exploding door kick becomes a theme, but it's not just the breakfast room doors. It's the lobby doors that I can clearly see out from my perch behind the counter. Even more unnerving, the private office entrance door that is unlabeled and only employees use to enter the back of the front desk becomes a target for these sporadic, unseen kicks. I keep a FD journal of anything that happens during our shift, anything that might be an issue for other shifts, complaints, special requests, anything out of the norm. I start noting the sounds in the journal and ask my coworkers if they've noticed any strange noises. Nobody else has, even the other night shift workers, but they did have a high turnover rate. Other than the front desk manager and housekeepers, within 6 months, I was the next longest employee. Other night shifters never lasted than 3 months, and I worked every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so they always got weekends off work always, but never stayed long. Next, the ice machine started coming on and just spitting ice out onto the breakfast room floor. This was less common than the booming doors, but it happened a handful of times in my 2 years there. It never happened on anyone else's shift, as far as I could find out. The owners just said it was a machine malfunction and mostly ignored me, telling me just to clean it up when it happened and reminded me to put out a wet floor caution sign if it was near breakfast time. Yet the owners were Indian, and after this started showing up at dawn and blessing my kingdom more often. After that was the clicking. If you've ever heard a dog that needs its nails trimmed trotting across a hardwood floor, that's the noise. At first I was on the lookout for a big rat or other critter, but security cameras and my vigilant search armed with a broom yielded nothing. I still told the owners to call pest control to be safe, but they found no evidence of a furry friend, caught nothing, and bait traps were left untouched. This became a routine sound too. Near the end of my time there, I was on my phone with a friend one night on the far back of my office, away from the desk in the L part where my industrial coffee makers are, and a small whiteboard we used to track daily numbers flew off the wall and smacked me almost square in the face, then dropped to the floor at my feet. It was odd because it's fallen before and it ends up straight down on what we call the load desk, where the manager works during the day. I was several steps away, say roughly 8 feet from that desk. There was no breeze to make it travel at an angle, and even if it had, it was mounted just barely above face level for me. It had to travel nearly straight sideways to smack me in the mug. I laughed it off, but I really kicked myself for not using my camera and getting a recording of the security footage at the time. It's the strongest evidence I've ever had of any of my paranormal events, and I just derped out. I guess I did have bigger issues in my life at the time that I was talking to a friend about, but boy was I dumb. Feel free to tell me how dumb I was. If it speaks to how distracted I was during that time in my life, that was when I worked straight through a death one empty room away from my office and didn't even notice.
I was an 18-year-old female when this incident occurred. I was in the first year of university. I was walking to one of my classes when I then saw a man walking towards me. There was nothing really too off-putting about his appearance. He was tall and slightly large, and he looked to be in his 40s. He was also wearing a shirt with my school's logo on it, the same shirt that the service workers wore. I noticed that he was staring at me. I stared back at him to try and make him look away, but he didn't. He continued to walk towards me and held eye contact till he passed me. I didn't really think too much of this. Over the next few months, I had saw him around campus several times, and the same thing would always happen. He would always stare at me until he walked past me, but he never once said a word. On one occasion, I had saw him in the basement of my building while I was doing laundry. Once again, he walked past me without saying anything. Although he really made me feel a bit uneasy, I didn't let it bother me too much, and just kind of assumed that maybe he just had something off about him. This continued for a couple of months before anything disturbing happened. On one night, my roommate was asleep and I needed to clear my head, so I slipped on my shoes and coat and then headed out for a smoke. Now, my university's campus was smoke-free, so I walked around to the back of my building and then lit a cigarette. I had heard some rustling coming from further away, still around the building but kind of in a spot where I couldn't see it. I didn't get too worried though, as the back of my building faced the woods, and we're kind of used to seeing deer and other small animals around the campus. Still though, I was really curious. I quietly walked over and looked around the corner. I was surprised to see a man standing there looking right up at my building. I started to squint my eyes, and that's when I realized that it was the same man who was always staring at me. What was he doing? His hands were in his pockets, and he seemed to just be staring right up at the windows. I felt a little uneasy, as that's when I realized that he was staring at the general area of my own window, but I couldn't tell for sure what he was looking at. I didn't want him to see me, so I quietly finished my cigarette and flicked it onto the ground. I crushed the cigarette into the ground with my shoe and then headed back to my room. I had then took a really quick shower and slipped on some PJs. I tried to fall asleep that night, but I just couldn't get that man out of my head. Why was he just staring at the building? Was he really looking into my window? After a few minutes of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided that my questions really needed answers. So I quietly got up and tiptoed across my room to the window. I looked out the window, and sure enough, the man was staring at me. When he noticed me staring back, I honestly expected him to walk away, but he didn't. He just continued to stare at me. I started to feel kind of sick at this point. Should I call someone? I mean, I guess he wasn't technically doing anything wrong, so I decided I would just leave it. He couldn't do anything to harm me. My door was always kept locked, and there was no way he could fit through my window. It was on the 3rd floor, and it was extremely tiny. I crawled back into bed and went to sleep. About 2 months had passed since this incident, and I hadn't seen the man since. I was hoping that maybe he had quit or maybe he had been fired, but I wasn't so lucky. One day I came back from class to then find my roommate standing in the lobby of my building, and she had 2 police officers standing with her. When she saw me, she had then grasped and ran right towards me, then hugging me. She was visibly really shaken, and she seemed really scared about something. I asked her what was going on, and before she could even answer me, a police officer then approached me. He then asked me to confirm my name and room number. I told him, and he then showed me a picture of the man. It was the same exact man that had been standing out my building 2 months prior. I said that I recognized him, and I told them everything that happened from the start of the year. The police officer sat me down, and he then told me what happened. Apparently, the man had been sneaking into our room like multiple times throughout the year. The man had both mine and my roommate's schedule so that he could see when we would be in and out of the room. He also had placed micro cameras in the corners of the room. My roommate wasn't feeling well, so when she had left one of her classes early one day, she had returned to the room to find the man standing in it. She then freaked out and called the campus police. The police then searched his office, and they found that he had stolen multiple things from my room. Things like my underwear, and he even stole my garbage. It was really weird. He also had like dozens of pictures of me, and some even taken around campus, and some extremely zoomed in on me in my room. The man also had a spare key to our room, which he would use to get in and out of it. The man was obviously fired from his job. I'm not exactly sure what kind of legal action was taken, but the police assured me that I'd never see him again. I've always really wondered what his true intentions were, and what would have happened if my roommate hadn't caught him that day. I guess it's a good thing I never found out.
About 2 years ago, I had trouble sleeping and would get these really bad headaches. I spoke to a friend of mine about it, and he suggested that I should go for a night drive, as it helped him when he was stressed out. I started going night drives whenever I was having trouble going to sleep. One night I was driving, and it was very foggy and lightly raining. I looked in my mirror, and in the distance, I could see headlights. It was a bit unusual to see a car at the time of night, but it wasn't anything suspicious. The headlights faded away, and I couldn't see them anymore. About a minute later, all of a sudden, the headlights were back, and right behind me, driving very aggressively, beeping their horn. I slowed down to let them pass me, but they didn't. They kept tailgating me. So I decided to pull over and see what their problem was, but when I stopped the car, they drove straight past me and disappeared down the road into the fog. I took a breath and then carried on driving. About 5 minutes went by, and I saw headlights in my mirror again. I didn't think it would be the same car as they had just passed me. But when the headlights sped up and were right behind me, once again beeping their horn and tailgating me aggressively, I knew it was the same car as before. I didn't understand why they were acting this way, and how they were now behind me even though they drove past me. I didn't pull over this time. Instead, I carried on driving. The driver of the car carried on tailgating me and beeping their horn constantly, just like before. But it wasn't long before the car lost control and swerved off the road and crashed into a tree. After seeing the car crash behind me, I stopped my car abruptly. I hesitated whether or not to get out and check to see if the person was okay. They seemed to be out to cause me harm specifically, but I couldn't leave the area knowing someone might be hurt. I turned my car around and drove up to the tree where the car crashed. When my headlights reached the tree, there was nothing there. There was no car, no tire tracks, nothing. I started to think I was losing my mind and not getting enough sleep. I headed home after finding nothing. The following day, I told my friend where I was driving and what I experienced. He laughed and said I might have seen a ghost. I thought he was joking, but he told me the road I was driving on was known as Death Road. I asked him why it was called that, and he told me apparently years ago, a drunk driver was aggressively trying to knock a car off the road until he lost control and crashed. He died at the scene. I'm not a person to believe in ghosts or supernatural stuff, but what I witnessed was so real, and the fact that I could hear the car right behind mine and hear the crash makes me believe I did experience something paranormal that night.
One time, I drove back to college after Christmas, but before the winter break was over, so I was the first of my roommates to get back to the house that we were renting. Our house was in a pretty isolated spot on the outskirts of a town in upstate New York. I pulled into the driveway behind the house, went to the trunk, and grabbed one of my bags, and then ran inside because I had to use the bathroom so badly. I had been on the road for over 5 hours. I was inside the house using the bathroom for maybe 5 minutes. Afterwards, I went back outside to get the rest of my stuff from the car, and there were footprints in the snow all around it. Now, as I said, I was alone in the middle of nowhere. The only set of footprints should have been mine, from where I had gotten out of the car on the driver's side, walked to the trunk, and then walked to the back door. Yet now, there was another set of footprints circling the car, and then leading into the woods at the back of the property. It appeared that the footprints had originally come from the woods as well. I had left my trunk open while I was inside, because I assumed I was alone, and nothing had been taken. But someone had seen me arrive. They came out of the woods, circled my car, and then returned to the woods. I grabbed the rest of my stuff, locked my car, ran into the house, and locked the doors.
The principal of an elementary school. He was in his late 20s, early 30s at the time, and despite being young, he was a born leader. He was a great principal and everyone loved him. I can attest to that as I attended multiple award ceremonies for him, and the respect and admiration he received was crazy. There was a young boy at the school who was having behavioral issues in class, and my grandfather saw that the kid didn't have a lot of parental support. So he called in his father and had talked with him about spending more time with his son in just a general parenting session. It turned out that all the boy needed was his dad's attention, and after a few weeks he was a happy model student. Whenever my grandfather would leave school late, he would see the dad was playing basketball with his son after he got home from work. It was one of those moments that he took pride in, being able to make a difference in people's lives. However, not everything had such an easy solution, and my grandfather found himself having to deal with an employee, Stanley the janitor, who was showing up to work drunk. Stanley was an alcoholic with a mean streak, and my grandfather tried on multiple occasions to deal with his behavior. Finally, one day Stanley showed up so drunk that my grandfather sent him home and called the superintendent to let him know he was going to be firing him the next morning after he sobered up. He then warned them to let him deal with it when Stanley was sober, because he was not a stable person. As it goes in these kinds of stories, the superintendent was furious and decided that he was going to call Stanley himself and fire him despite my grandfather's warning. No one called my grandfather to tell him about it either, so he was completely in the dark and thought he could deal with it in the morning. Stanley was furious and went to the school that evening. He searched the offices, my grandfather's included, and tore things apart until he finally had what he wanted. He was in a blaze of fury, and on his way out, he saw the father and his son playing basketball. He walked towards them and pulled something out of his trousers. It was a gun. He then proceeded to shoot the little boy, killing him instantly. The father was so upset, was hysterically crying, but somehow managed to get the gun away from Stanley and shoot him. My grandfather was called to the elementary school immediately by the police because there were 2 dead bodies. The little boy and Stanley were dead. What was even worse was the crying from the father and him saying that he couldn't save his son. It was clear that he could never forgive himself for that day. My grandfather was pulled aside by one of the police who had searched Stanley for evidence. They had found a list, a hit list of people that he was going to kill, and all the addresses of those people that he had retrieved when he searched the offices. My grandfather was number 1 on that list. So, if it weren't for that father, it's likely that I would never been able to meet my grandfather, and possibly my mother and grandmother would have been killed if Stanley had been able to complete his mission. To this day, I get goosebumps whenever I hear that story, and it's just so chilling. My grandfather never uttered a single word about this after his initial recount, and my mother made me swear to never tell him I knew. He carried the weight of that boy's death on him until the day he died. My name is Chloe, I'm 21 and I'm from Scotland. In 2018, me, my ex, and his little brother decided to explore abandoned places. We stumbled across an old abandoned mental hospital. Lennox Castle Hospital is the name. We decided to check it out, bearing in mind it is approximately 10 p.m., so it was dark. We went in having to climb rocks and stuff, and when we got in, we were just wandering around enjoying scaring each other like you do. My ex, who we'll call C, went into one of the rooms. Me and his brother stood outside. We'll call his brother R. Me and R were standing at the window of the room C was in when we heard keys being shaken behind us. I thought it was my keys, but then I remembered C had them in his pocket and he was in front of us. We kept hearing movement as well, when there wasn't any wind. The next time I went up was with 4 of my friends towards the end of 2018. The middle of winter and around 10 to 11 p.m., so it was pitch black. There was me, A, K, J, and T. Me and T kept hearing high-pitched screams coming from above us, but no one else had actually heard them, and they thought we were just joking. We also kept hearing movement in the bushes, and again, no wind. The walk back down was probably the most terrifying thing to ever happen to me. T told me she had seen glowing red eyes in the trees. I told her it's her mind playing tricks, trying to create a reason for the noises we heard. We walked further down, and I had the feeling that I had to look into the trees. And as I looked, I saw them. The red eyes. I tried to pass it off, telling myself that it was an animal in the trees, but Jay had the light and it was way ahead of us, but not only that, the trees were far apart and on a hill. The eyes were between the trees and looked like they were floating. No one else had seen or heard anything. We had no explanation for why it was just me and T who had seen them. Fast forward to tonight, 11 p.m. Me and my best friend Jed decided to check it out. We walked up but kept hearing screeching. We passed it off as possibly being foxes. The movement started up again just as I remembered it. The screeching was the same noise I heard before, but this time Jed had heard it. We got to the hospital and we were quite far back from it. I had my flashlight on and I pointed it towards the building. Jed stood mesmerized by it as it's a lovely structure. I stood my light to one of the windows and I had saw a railing. The railing looked like it had a black figure standing, holding on. I mentioned it to Jed and all he said was, "No, top left." He paused. I asked him what it was and he rushed me back to my car. When we got back to the car, he said he had seen a pure black figure in the top left window, which twitched its head as if it were trying to get us to go to it. All the way back to the car, we hear footsteps and the screeching again. This place definitely has something going on, and I will not stop going there until I find out exactly what.
The following story is told from the point of view of a female. Last Thanksgiving, my boyfriend and I loaded our 2-month-old daughter into our car and drove from Miami to Naples to visit my family. Being new parents, we were extremely nervous about taking such a lengthy trip with the baby, and packed for every possible scenario. We left shortly after 12, my boyfriend behind the wheel, and we hit the highway, which was swollen with holiday traffic. After about an hour of driving, the baby became fussy, and we pulled over at a rest stop to feed her and change her diaper. While I was changing her, my boyfriend stood outside the car stretching, and suddenly called my name. Peering outside the car, I looked across the street in the direction he was pointing. There was a clown with a purple star painted over his face, and wild, crazy, unkempt black hair, and a purple and white checkered outfit standing on the opposite side of the parking lot, just waving to people as they pulled in and out of the rest stop. I chuckled and returned to what I was doing, unbothered by the clown, figuring it was just part of some kind of promotion. As we pulled out of the station, the clown waved at us, and I gave a lazy acknowledgement back. Just before my boyfriend took his foot off the brake and eased into traffic, the clown gave me the most hungry, sinister smile I had ever seen, and shouted, "You would look amazing draped over my lap." Even through the closed car window, I heard him clearly, and said, "Wow, what a creep." As we drove away, I repeated what the clown had said to my boyfriend, who hadn't quite heard it, and for a few minutes he was dead set on turning around to confront him. But I told him it wasn't worth it, as we still had a long drive ahead of us. We arrived in Naples shortly after 2:30, and by then, I had already forgotten about the incident, and didn't even bring it up to my parents. We had a great time at my parents' place, and ended up leaving close to 11:30 at night, much later than we had intended to. My parents tried to convince us to stay, and while we had plenty of stuff for the baby, we hadn't packed any overnight things for ourselves. So we decided just to commit to the drive. We figured that there would be a lot less traffic, and it would take a shorter amount of time to get home. My boyfriend had been driving for about 45 minutes when he asked me if I wouldn't mind taking over, as he was having a hard time keeping his eyes focused. I told him to pull over at the next rest area, and I would take the wheel. After a few minutes, we see a sign for a rest area and pull into it. It wasn't the same rest stop as before. It had no bathrooms, vending machines, or anything. It was basically just a long parking lot, with one row of parking spaces which looped back onto the road. My boyfriend pulled the car into a spot, nose first, so it was facing a long chain-link fence, and beyond it, there was just trees and a swamp. I couldn't see anything specific in the glow of the headlights. He put the car in park and left the engine running, and the lights on as he climbed out of the driver's seat. The baby started to fuss as soon as the car stopped moving, and after I climbed out of the passenger seat, I opened the back door to check on her. My boyfriend climbed into the passenger seat and immediately shut his eyes. After I confirmed that the baby was fine and would probably fall back asleep when we started driving again, I shut the back door and made my way to the driver's seat. That's when I heard the sound of the chain-link fence rattling, and something being dragged across the metal links, steadily drawing closer. I turned in the direction of the noise, and for a split second, I only noticed the dark outline of a figure on the opposite side of the fence, until they stepped into the light of our headlights. It was the exact same clown from the other rest stop, except this time he had a large red stain splattered across his purple and white costume, and was dragging a broken beer bottle across the fence. He pressed his face directly into the gaps in the fence and smiled at me. He cackled, "Hello again," and started making lewd gestures with his tongue. I was at a loss for words. It was so unbelievably surreal that I could only stare at him in disbelief and horror, not knowing whether I should be truly afraid or start laughing at the absurdity of it. My boyfriend launched himself out of the passenger seat and screamed, "Get in the car!" When he opened his car door, the baby started crying out, and the sound could be heard across the silent parking lot, and the clown immediately started singing in a grotesque, uneven voice. "Rock-a-bye baby in the treetop. When the clown comes, the cradle will rock." My parents had given us a set of fancy glasses for our dining room table. My boyfriend launched one directly at the clown. The glass shattered against the chain-link fence and sprayed tiny razor projectiles all over. The clown hissed and immediately booked it to the end of the fence. My boyfriend and I jumped into the car, slammed the doors, and locked them. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the spot, and as we put the car in drive, we saw the clown charging towards us across the parking lot. My boyfriend yelled at me to hit him, but I swerved to avoid him and floored it out of the lot and back onto the highway. For the next several minutes my heart was racing, convinced that at any moment a speeding car would come up behind us and try to run us off the road, but fortunately that never happened. We were so shaken and traumatized that all we could do for the rest of the way home was ask each other over and over again, what the heck just happened? We could only speculate what the guy was doing out there at 12 a.m., dressed like a clown in the middle of the Everglades on Thanksgiving night. We considered that he was just trying to mess with people. But you would need some serious balls to pull that kind of stunt out there in the Everglades. The people that live around there don't put up with that kind of nonsense. And what was he even doing there? Just hiding behind the dark fence for a completely random car to show up so he could traumatize them? I don't know if the stain on his suit was actually blood, but he made us feel threatened enough that we felt justified throwing something at him. And seeing as how his response was to charge us, I suspect that his intentions were hostile. The fact that we had seen him earlier that day made the situation even worse, because it felt like he was stalking us. My boyfriend had a license to carry a gun, so all I can say is, it's a good thing that he wasn't packing that particular night. This Thanksgiving, we planned to stay home.
This happened a couple of years ago. I was a freshman in college, my second semester. I was kind of a loner, if I'm going to be honest with you. Still am. At the time, I had a small YouTube channel here where I made enough money that I didn't have to work a regular job. Most college students had to work fast food or whatever, and I was fortunate enough to not be one of them. Don't get me wrong. I was poor and still lived with my parents, but I made enough online that I was comfortable enough. I remember my schedule was pretty hectic this second semester. I had a really long day on Friday. Every Friday, my first class was at 7 a.m., and my last class of the day was at 4 p.m. There were a couple of hours between classes throughout the day, and I think I had about 4 in total. I lived too far from college to be able to justify driving back home, so I just kind of had to wait around on campus all day long. It was only about 4 weeks into the semester when I was really tired of this routine already. I seriously thought about dropping one of the classes, but I figured that it was going to be worth it if I could graduate when I planned to. At the end of this particular Friday, I was starving. I didn't like to eat anything on campus because I didn't really trust the staff. I know that might be bad to say, but there was this one time that I ordered food from the cafeteria on campus and got food poisoning. They're a little infamous on campus, and there are a few people that regularly eat there. Understandably so. I just found myself waiting until I got out of class to eat. And then I can eat somewhere that I actually wanted to. I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to eat after class, and I just settled on grabbing some McDonald's on the way. I was originally planning on picking up some at the drive-thru, but I also had to really go to the bathroom by the time I got there. I just figured it would be easier to go in and order inside. I always found it difficult to order at the drive-thru anyway. I had a hard time understanding what people were saying through the microphones, so I got in there, ordered my food, and I was good to go. I was just going to bring it into my car and eat as I drove home, but I noticed something weird going on. Right outside of the McDonald's, 2 people were having an argument. They looked like they were around my age, probably late high schoolers or college students themselves. I stood there for a moment watching to see if the argument between these 2 people escalated, and it did. The man started holding the girl's arms down and pinned her against the car. I was assuming it was one of their cars. I wasn't sure if they were together or what the situation really was. I didn't really want to intervene because it was somebody else's drama and not really my problem, but I got more and more anxious about the girl's safety. This guy was a lot bigger than her. He at least had a foot of height, and he looked like he was an athlete. I stood there for a few more minutes watching to see what was going to happen. I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but I understood that the situation was getting worse. It eventually got to the point when he opened the car door and threw her inside. I mean, literally pushed her and flung her inside the car. She didn't scream or anything, but it looked very startling. Made me jump a little bit, and then he went inside the car too. They were in the back seat, and I immediately got suspicious when he closed the car door behind him. I heard the girl start screaming from inside the car and immediately knew that I had to do something. I put my McDonald's food down on the sidewalk and then ran over to the car. I opened the car door and he was very obviously surprised that I had done so. I saw that he was about halfway through taking off his belt. I punched him in the back and this antagonized him. He struggled to get out of the car so that he could fight me. Thankfully, there were a few other people who had gotten involved before me and him had a go at it. There were two older men in their 40s who happened to be walking into the McDonald's that turned around and came over to help. When the other people started getting involved, he got anxious and just got in his car and drove away. I asked the girl what had happened. She told me that she didn't know that guy and he was just some random freak that wanted to use her. She claimed that he asked her to do it, but when she declined, he started getting confrontational about it. And I guess that was when I had noticed what was going on. This guy wasn't very smart. We were eventually able to identify him and he was eventually charged with assault. The situation could very easily have been bad. If I hadn't intervened, he may have been able to do God knows what to this poor girl. It's crazy to think that such a horrible crime was almost committed in such a public place. I mean, people are always at McDonald's. The thought that someone could even attempt such a violent and repulsive act in public like that blows my mind. The girl thanked me profusely as I had just saved her a lot of physical and psychological torment. I told her that I didn't do anything special and that I was just trying to do the right thing.
This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor. Stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. One night, I woke up at around 1 o'clock in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I awoke from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way up, and a few seconds later, steam was rising, and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it close behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw that the knife was missing and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat and was evicted after not paying rent. It seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place.
For some context, I'm a 19-year-old female, and I just moved out of state and had just started my first semester in college. I didn't live on campus, as it basically costed a fortune, so I had to live with my parents until I could afford to move out. One day over the weekend, My parents had left the house for a 3-day vacation, so I had the house to myself. Being only 19 and easily getting bored, there weren't too many things that I could occupy myself with. So I call up my friend who lives just around the corner from me and invite her over to watch some Netflix as we had recently got it. She agreed and came over to my house, and we both sat on the couch and watched a movie. About an hour into the movie we were watching, my friend grabs the remote and pauses the movie, saying, "Liz, do you hear that?" It was very faint, but I could just make out a sort of slight metal banging coming from my backyard. I live by a wooded area, so there are a bunch of unwanted critters that look around my backyard. However, the noise sounded as if it were in a pattern. It's the same bang and scraping noise repeated over and over again, and I felt sick to my stomach. Being a very paranoid person who watches too many horror movies, I grabbed my brother's baseball bat from his room while I opened the back door. It was practically pitch black outside, so I couldn't see as to what was making the noise. At first, I thought that it could have been a rat or even a squirrel. But when I turned on the outside light, all of my thoughts as to what it could be quickly vanished. The outside light revealed a man hitting my AC condenser with one of my dad's gardening tools. He was super thin, maybe about 5'8", and he looked like he hadn't seen anyone in years. I lost it and ran back inside, telling my friend that we had to leave through the front, and that's exactly what we did. We ran out of that house so fast and got into my car while my friend was on the phone with the police. All the while, I had been crying my eyes out until we stopped at a nearby gas station so I could calm down. As far as I know, whoever was in my yard that night was gone. The police searched the area, but there was no sign of the person that matched my description. Later, the police told me some very disturbing news. They said that, as they were looking around my house, they saw that the door to my garage was wide open and broken down.
This happened to me about 15 years ago. I lived near the ocean, and I frequented a certain spot on the beach all the time. It was a lonely spot, and not many people ever really showed up there. This one Saturday afternoon, I was laying out in the sand in my spot, relaxing and tanning like I always did. It's not uncommon for me to fall asleep. I did sometimes if the sun wasn't too hot on my skin. This one particular day, I did. I woke up a while later to the sun now setting, and realized I had slept for quite a while. I looked to my left, and saw a woman sitting near me, in the sand, but not on a towel. She was wearing jean shorts and a bathing suit top, and she had really pretty red hair. At first, I didn't really acknowledge her, but after glancing at her a few times, I noticed that she was just staring out into the ocean, and didn't turn to look at me, or anything for that matter. I felt a bit of curiosity, and said hello to her. She said hello right back, without turning her head to look at me. Right after that, she sprung to her feet and walked away. I thought that was weird, but didn't think anything really of it. About 30 minutes later, I packed up my stuff and left. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I had a great day relaxing at the beach like I always did. Once I was home, I started making myself dinner. I heard my phone ring and walked over to my purse on the counter and pulled it out. It was my mom, and we started talking about the usual things when I noticed a square folded piece of paper sticking out in my purse in the midst of our conversation. My mom continued talking, and I pulled it out and unfolded it, confused, because I was pretty sure I didn't put it there. I literally dropped the phone when I read what was written. It was a note, and it said, "I was going to rob you and stab you in the throat, but you just looked so peaceful." I picked up the phone and told my mom what happened, remembering that girl on the beach. We both nearly passed out,
This happened to me a few years ago when I was 25 years old, and this is by far one of the scariest and unexplained encounters I've ever had. It is absolutely true, and it's something that I just had to share. I live in a terrace house, which is basically multiple houses combined together, forming that of an apartment. It's not the best place to live in, but my parents wanted me to move out, and this was one of the only few locations that I could afford monthly rent. I live in Los Angeles, so it's expensive as hell, and without a lot of money, you're basically either struggling financially or living on the streets. Anyway, I had just gotten home from work after a long day's shift and needed time to myself. Being the big couch potato I was, I threw myself onto my couch and watched some Netflix with my cat until my fiancé got home. I have a peach-colored American short-haired cat named Gus, and he's actually my emotional support animal to help me cope with my anxiety. So I'm sitting there, watching Orange is the New Black with my cat, when he suddenly starts meowing repeatedly. Even though it's something all cats tend to do, I found the behavior very strange, as my cat never meows unless he wants food. But seeing as he was already fed not too long ago, it didn't make any sense. All of a sudden, his meowing turned into high-pitched hissing while arching his back. The hair on his back also began to stick up. At this point, I didn't know how he had gotten so scared. And that's when I realized that he was looking at the bathroom door in the hallway. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach as I realized something must have startled him. The door to the bathroom was shut, but I quietly tiptoed over to the door and put my ear to it. And that's when I heard it. A loud bang hit the door, and I grabbed Gus and took him outside of my apartment down to the lobby. At first, I figured that my boyfriend was messing with me in the worst way possible, but he had claimed that he was still at work when I called him. With no other option, I call police and they have 2 cars over within 5 minutes. 2 of the officers questioned me, while the other 2 went to go check in my apartment. When they got back, they had some very odd news to share with me. They had gone up to my room and searched my entire apartment, but didn't find anyone. This was technically impossible, as I had locked the front door when I heard the noise, so whoever was there couldn't have left. I don't know if it was an intruder or something paranormal, but I knew that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me as my cat had gotten startled. One thing I do know is that I wasn't alone in my apartment building that evening.
There are 2 types of people who work at McDonald's, or fast food places in general. There are ambitious, intelligent people who are trying to work hard to achieve a goal, in the hopes that one day they'll be able to quit for the sake of something better. And then there are the losers, those with no ambition who have given up and have no desire to achieve anything other than a weekly paycheck. I like to consider myself in the first category. As I was working hard to afford my apartment while taking classes at the local community college, I normally worked the later shifts at the drive-thru window, which is the one spot most employees hated working the most. You constantly have to deal with extremely impatient, oftentimes very rude people who are on their phones or have music blaring, and oftentimes don't realize that I wasn't the individual who took their order, so it's not my fault if it's wrong. In addition to that, you're pretty much constantly on your feet and exposed to the elements. No matter how cold, windy, or rainy it is, you have to keep leaning out into it, wishing that you were in a warm car about to drive away from this place. My point being is please try to be more kind and patient with the drive-thru people. Yeah, some are lazy, but most are trying their best, and even though you only see them for about half a minute, a kind remark or a warm smile might make their day. Anyways, now that I've gotten that off my chest, I work the late shift with 2 people who I believe qualify for the second category of employees. Connie was a high school dropout who was almost always late and was never invested in what she was doing, and Harold was a deadbeat who often smelled like weed and only kept the job because otherwise his parents would throw him out of the house. He was 32 years old. So one night I was there after 11 p.m. by the drive-thru window on an extremely cold January night, flipping through the pages of my class notes and trying to keep warm by the fry machine. Connie was mopping while looking at her phone, and Harold was in the back probably getting baked in the walk-in cooler. That late at night, we rarely got customers, and if we did, they were almost always zonked-out college kids who used the drive-thru but never physically walked into the restaurant. I stood up and stretched my legs and told Connie that I was heading to the bathroom. It was around 11:30 at this point. I came back less than 5 minutes later, with Connie more or less in the same spot that she was before. I walked past her and turned the corner to return to the window, and froze dead in my tracks. There was a bald man in white face makeup and a black hoodie standing directly outside the window staring in. His eyes were wide, with a blank expression that read, "What kind of trouble can I create?" The figure made direct eye contact with me and smirked, and slammed his palm against the window. I had no idea what to do, and inside my head, the words, clown, mime, psychopath, danger, and death all exploded like fireworks. The window was already shut and locked to protect myself from the cold, but the doors were all unlocked, and this person could easily walk right in and grab any one of us if he wanted to. In my head, I kept referring to it as he, but honestly, I had no idea what the gender was. The outfit and makeup made the stranger look androgynous. Maybe that was the point. The figure slapped on the glass window again with its hand. "Open!" drawing out the word like a snake. Now, even if the figure wasn't dressed like that, I was under no obligation to open the window. It's unlawful to serve walk-ups at the drive-thru window, certainly for their safety, but also for ours. I shook my head and backed away. I called over my shoulder, "Lock the doors." The whole time, this figure didn't break eye contact with me, and to the best of my memory, I don't even remember it blinking. It drew back its lips in a sinister smile, and I shit you not, its gums were black. I don't mean I was too far away that I couldn't see clearly. I mean its gums were as black as licorice. "Open!" It hissed again, louder this time. Its other hand slammed against the window, and it licked its lips with its tongue. "Open!" That's when a third hand slammed itself into the window. A left hand, and it was just as pale and as skeletal as the other two. I lost my shit. "Holy shit! Call the cops!" I screamed, and ran back into the office, which was the only room with a locking door and no windows. I heard Connie scream, "What the fuck?" And she dropped her mop and flew across the room and made for the back with me. All the yelling attracted Harold, and I shoved past him into the office and told him to look at the security camera. Sure enough, the white-faced creeper looked to have 3 hands on the window and was tilting its head back and forth, perhaps trying to discover where I ran off to. We locked the office door and called the cops, explaining to the operator that there was at least 2 prowlers outside acting in a threatening manner towards us. I kind of expected it to be over after I called the cops. If it was a prank, they would run once they realized they scared me enough to call 911. But it didn't end there. We watched as the figure left the drive-thru window, circled the building, and made for the restaurant door. "Is there a second one? Look for a second one!" I panicked while still on the phone with the operator. Connie was freaking out, and Harold was muttering something about not getting the police involved, likely because he was carrying weed. That's when the power went out. Everything. Cameras, lights, phone, the whole building went down. And barely 10 seconds after we all quieted down after shouting at each other in the dark, we heard footsteps in the dining room area. "Connie, did you lock the doors?" I whispered. She didn't reply. I think she had her hand pressed over her mouth. "Open!" We heard a voice call from outside the room in the dark. "Open!" The shout came at least 3 more times, circling from the kitchen to right off the hallway where we were hiding. I was convinced I was about to die, and every decision I had made in my life that brought me there was flashing before my eyes. We heard footsteps pass the office. After another few minutes, we heard the wail of police sirens outside, and at any moment, we expected to hear gunfire and the police shouting at someone to get on the ground, but we never did. We waited until the police identified themselves, and opened the door and ran out into the parking lot. Since the power was down, we couldn't show the cops the security footage, so we just told them what we saw. They swept the whole building and said it was clear. The owner of that particular franchise store showed up about an hour later, after Harold and Connie had left. I waited for the power to be restored, so an officer could escort me back inside to collect my belongings. The next day my manager called me and asked me to work the night shift. I asked him if the creep from last night had been caught. When he said, "There was no creep," I told him I quit and hung up the phone. This story is completely true. I have no idea what caused the power outage, which apparently erased all the security footage from the day. Without proof on video, my manager and the cops concluded that it was an elaborate prank, but that third hand still bothers me to this day, even more so than its hungry, inhuman eyes. Sure, it could have been a prank, but I wish someone would just confirm that for me, so I can sleep again. Keep your windows locked at night, and if you hear someone tapping from behind the curtains, don't open them.
This story took place about 3 years ago. I started my new job working at a morgue that was about 3 miles into the countryside. For the first week, everything went fine. I got shown around the building, how everything works, and I understood my job. That was until I met the guy who used to deliver the bodies to the morgue. His name was Kenny. I first met him on the elevator. We shook hands and he made an inappropriate joke. He also stunk of smoke, had long greasy hair, bad yellow teeth, and a faded, poorly drawn tattoo of a snake on his forearm. My first thought that he was just weird. I figured I would only see him from time to time when he delivered the bodies. That wasn't the case, however, as he would come up into the building and talk to the staff. Apparently he had worked there for years and knew everybody. I asked a few staff members about him, and they kind of just shrugged him off as being eccentric. It was like I was the only one who saw through that. He would joke around with most people, but when it came to me, it was like he was a different person. The first time we met, he would make inappropriate jokes towards me. He would joke about the dead bodies that got delivered and make crude comments about the way the people died, and actually found it funny. One night, however, I was working on a body when I decided to take a little break. When I returned, I found the body was off the table and propped up against the wall. I almost had a heart attack. And then Kenny jumped out from the corner, screaming and grabbing my shoulder, shaking me violently. Then he stopped and laughed, telling me how good he got me, and my reaction was hilarious. This was the last straw, and I had enough and reported this to my superiors. My complaint was backed up by the footage from the CCTV cameras. The next evening, as I arrived into work, I saw Kenny walking down the corridor, and he didn't have his weird grin on his face. His look was much more disturbing. He looked furious, like he was a different person. He passed by me while giving me the worst stare I've ever seen. I was told later that he had been fired. I was a little bit surprised. I didn't know what they would do. I didn't know they were firing him exactly, but I was kind of relieved. That night, I finished work around 3 a.m. and got into my car to drive home. As soon as I pulled out, another car started up from across the parking lot and started to instantly tailgate me. Like I said, the building was located in the country, so there were no other cars on the road. At first, I didn't know who this was. I pulled over to see if the car would keep going, but as soon as I pulled over, the car slammed on its brakes. That was when Kenny came running out of his car and over to mine, yanking on the door handle as hard as he could, while banging on the window screaming for me to get out of the car. I thought he was going to rip the door off and kill me. I quickly started my car back up and drove off as fast as I could. I saw Kenny get into his car. For some reason, he didn't chase me. I'm not sure if his car wouldn't start or he just decided not to pursue me. Either way, I was relieved. I later informed my superior of what happened. I didn't find out what happened, whether the police were involved or what, but I never saw Kenny again after that. Thinking what might have happened if somehow Kenny did manage to open my door keeps me awake at night. My name is Ken, and the other day I was watching videos on YouTube, and one of them was why people experience paranormal activity or feel like they live in a haunted house. One of the reasons that people experience things supernatural or paranormal is for a punishment of an action you did or didn't do. I found it interesting because about 4 years ago, I had a very strange and frightening experience. The job I worked for was changing things around, and it asked me to work later. So for a short period of time, I was driving home late night every night. One night when I was driving, it was cold, raining, and I was very tired. I wasn't used to the late nights just yet. As I was driving, I noticed a hitchhiker on the side of the road with his hand out asking for a ride. I never picked up a hitchhiker and didn't plan to then. In my mind, it was too dangerous. So I drove past him. I didn't look back at all. A few miles down the road, I saw another hitchhiker. It was like it was the same person that I drove past, but this time, they weren't holding out their hand. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, so I stopped at the next gas station I found to get an energy drink. I went inside the gas station, grabbed an energy drink, and stood at the counter waiting for the cashier to come back, wherever he was. As I was waiting, I looked outside and it looked like the hitchhiker was standing in the parking lot looking towards the gas station. At that point, the cashier came to the counter, and when I looked back outside, the hitchhiker was gone. I thought I just needed some sleep. I got in my car and carried on driving home. About 5 minutes passed when I saw the same hitchhiker standing on the side of the road. I looked in the mirror and briefly saw a man in the back seat watching me. This scared me and made me jump so much I nearly lost control of the car. I stopped the car, got out, and checked the back seat and saw no one. I stood there trying to calm down and catch my breath. After calming down, I got back in my car and continued driving. The whole ride home, I was afraid to look in my mirror. Even though I didn't see that man again, I still felt him sitting there watching me. I never came up with a logical explanation of what I experienced that night. Before watching that video about paranormal crap, I always thought it was my lack of sleep that caused me to see things. But now I think what I was seeing was that man on the road and in my car was some kind of punishment for not picking him up.
A couple of years ago, I worked at a McDonald's in Kansas. It was a location with a large outdoor play place for the kids. In all honesty, if it wasn't for that thing, I probably would have kept my job much longer. Part of my responsibilities included maintaining the cleanliness and safety of the big, colorful, large, intestine-looking pyramid of tubes and slides. It goes without saying that kids are messy, and whenever one had a bathroom-related accident or there was an injury, I had to go clean and sterilize the thing the best I could. I'm a relatively small person, so I was able to access most of the spots in the play place just fine, and because of that, I knew the maze-like structure very well. It's ironic that I went to school to design skyscrapers, and the closest I ever got to that was becoming an expert with the inner workings of a McDonald's child trap. One night after work, my friend Nate and I decided to hang out and have a smoke before we drove home. The play place was closed even though the restaurant was still open, but instead of sitting in our cars, we unlocked the gate and wandered into the enclosure where the mini playground was, locking the gate behind us. Technically, we probably shouldn't have been doing that, but I felt given how much time and sweat I sacrificed to this thing, I had earned the relative privacy it could provide me. I sat at the base of one of the large tube slides and lit my cigarette, while Nate sat on a bench directly across from me. We had been talking for about 10 minutes. I shifted my weight in preparation to stand up, when from within the slide, something grabbed me hard on the shoulder. What felt like a large hand grabbed my left shoulder, tight enough to make my joints pop, and I felt an index finger and thumb brush the skin of my neck. I screamed and launched myself up and sprinted to the exit, pulling at the door frantically before remembering that it was locked and I had the key. As Nate assaulted me with questions about what just happened, I tried to catch my breath and stared back at the slide, waiting for a fellow coworker to emerge and laugh, having played a great practical joke on me, but nothing happened. I didn't hear a thing from within the structure. I unlocked the gate, walked out, and slammed it shut, and locked it again. I ran back into the restaurant, and immediately went to the back office to check the security video. The entrance and the spot where I had been sitting was monitored, as were two other angles that showed the majority of the small gated area. but there was still about a third of the structure that we couldn't see. After about 5 minutes of watching the monitors closely, I called a friend of mine who was a cop. He drove in about 15 minutes later, and together we walked back into the play place area, armed with flashlights and mace. We examined the entire structure. Not only was there no one there, but there were no signs that anyone had been hiding inside or had broken in. I was at a complete loss for words and feeling very foolish. But I knew with certainty that I had been grabbed. I barely slept that night, and the following morning I came in early to review the entire tape from the previous night. Not once did anyone emerge from the slide or the gate. Before we opened the place to the kids again, myself and the biggest coworker I had went through the whole thing again, but again, there was nothing found. The play place is completely enclosed within a fenced-in area, with only one gate leading in or out. The fence is around 8 feet high, not impossible to climb, but it would be extremely difficult. To this day, I'm still at a loss to explain what happened. Some people I tell this to are convinced I experienced something paranormal and that the play place is haunted. Others think I'm the victim of an extremely well thought out practical joke. At this point, I wouldn't even be angry to discover that. I'm just desperate to learn how it was done. I quit the job about 4 or 5 months after the incident. What bothers me the most is that if there was a living, breathing person there, they would have had to silently prop themselves up in that slide, fighting gravity, barely making a sound or breathing for me to have missed them, and then after they grabbed me, climbed back up the tunnel without making a sound. I didn't hear a whisper of movement behind me, or even feel the faintest hint of breath on the back of my neck. I really hope one day to discover the truth behind what happened, and why.
I'm a 17-year-old girl who goes to the local high school here. I never really had much dating experience, but this guy clearly didn't have much either. When the story takes place, I was around 14 years old. For some quick context, in my state, you are legally allowed to date someone under 18 so long as you are 2 years older or younger, meaning that someone who is 16 can date an 18-year-old, but a 14-year-old dating an 18-year-old could lead to serious consequences. I've been a part of a classroom that we refer to as BMC, which is a class for kids with behavioral issues, such as anger or depression. I've been a part of this program since middle school, but never have I been through a person quite like this. I normally keep to myself, listening to my music at a deafening volume, and because of this, I never had friends in that classroom, especially since this was during my freshman year and sophomore year. I was nowhere near popular during that time, yet I did happen to get several desperate guys approaching me. Normally I would reject them, yet for some reason this time I didn't. Maybe it was pity, perhaps. I was waiting at the far end of the bus loop one day, given the fact that my bus was a special needs bus. As I was listening to music, I saw a boy approach me. He was bigger in size, always seemed to wear the exact same superhero shirt and jacket. I still to this day don't even know if he even washed it. For this story, we'll call him Freddy, mainly because he reminded me of the freaky animatronic. Anyway, he came up to me and told me that he had a crush on me, despite me not even knowing his name prior to this point. I was a little creeped out by this, so I was a little lost in terms of words. He asked for my number. I said yes, but then what he said next later gave me goosebumps. This is very important to keep in mind. "Don't tell your parents," he said. I asked why, and all he said was, "I could get in trouble." At this time, I was very gullible and thought, why get him in trouble when he doesn't know better? See, I'm autistic, and at the time I had a feeling he was as well. Before you go off and tell me that he really doesn't know any better, I should tell you that just because someone is autistic doesn't mean that they are dumb or can't be manipulative. Even people with mental illnesses can be a bit of a bad apple. I know that from experience with Freddy and many others. When I gave him my number, we small-talked for a small bit until my bus finally arrived. Even at the time, I was so relieved to see my driver to see that I would escape Freddy. So I bid my goodbyes and he waved. He then said to me, "I love you." I nearly vomited at that statement. I gave him a bewildered look and he asked, "Too soon?" "Yeah, too soon," I confirmed. I hurried onto my bus and sat down. I tried to avoid looking in the windows so I didn't have to look at him. Once again, he was far from attractive or even hygienic. I soon got blown up by texts from him to the point that I had to turn off notifications for his texts. But then when I did respond, he would complain and ask why I wasn't responding. When I said I was busy, he would just ask when I would be done. When I told him I didn't know in order to buy myself some time away from him, he'd just text me 10 to 15 minutes later asking if I was done. Clingy people were my biggest turnoff, especially since I was that person at one point as well. I know that being on the receiving end of that sort of affection can be very uncomfortable. When I finally had enough, I casually told my parents the whole story. They panicked and told me to block him while they contacted my BMC manager. The next day, my BMC manager called me to see her privately. She explained that even though he was a senior, he had attempted to pull these things off with several girls before me. She explained that he knew full well what he was doing and that I had to stay away from him. I got scolded by her and family that next time. I should communicate what is happening, especially given the fact that this boy was far from the first boy to attempt to take advantage of me. He was luckily one of the few that failed, thankfully. I am sad to say that even though I went through this experience, I still am too gullible and always have been. And because of this, I'm asking all of you, regardless of your gender, to consider what it is you want. If you don't want to follow your gut or communicate your feelings, you could fall into the same trap I've fallen into more times than I like to admit.
I was 10 years old and being wheeled into the hospital late at night. Once I was inside, I remember the doctor telling my parents that I had pneumonia, and my mom started to cry. Those are the only things I remember about my visit up until I was left alone on the first night. I have no idea what time it was when this occurred, but probably very late. Everyone else in the rooms around me were sleeping, and so was I, until I heard something. I was facing the center of the room when I opened my eyes. I heard someone's shoes squeaking on the floor outside my hospital room. I turned over and saw a nurse walk by, but she had walked out of my vision, past my window before I could see her face. About 2 seconds passed, and then I saw her walk by again. This is when my heart stopped beating, because of what exactly I saw. She was walking by at a very fast pace, and was looking at me through the window in an exaggerated stare, meaning she was walking by, but her head turned completely to the right side as she did, not able to see in front of her as she walked, and just staring at me. Very quickly she was out of sight again, and then suddenly she started walking by again, in the opposite direction. She was walking back and forth in front of my window. This time her head turned completely to the left, again, staring into my eyes. She had brown hair that was messy, and she looked insane. On this pass, I noticed that her eyes were opened very wide. At this point I thought my heart would explode because of how it was beating and how scared I was. Nobody else was in sight. When she walked out of my vision, 2 seconds later, she was walking by again, every time her head turned to the side looking at me. I remember thinking, even at 10 years old, that something about her was very wrong. I didn't move a muscle and could do nothing except just watch this incredibly scary woman walk back and forth in front of my window. One of the times she walked by, she was smiling, a huge, sickening smile that made tears well up in my eyes. Every time she walked by, she could not see what was in front of her, because the only thing she wanted to see was me, in my bed, through my window. It seemed like several minutes had passed, until finally she did not walk by again. She simply walked by one last time, and then was gone. I sat there in my bed and peered out my window, expecting her to walk by again at any moment. But she didn't. I must have stared out my window for the better part of an hour before my eyes got so heavy that I fell asleep. The next morning I awoke with my dad sitting in my chair next to my bed, reading a book. He smiled when he saw that I was awake, and I told him what I saw before I fell asleep that night. He didn't seem to be scared, or even very alarmed. He asked me if I was sure that it wasn't a dream. I was 100% sure then, and I am 100% sure now. The woman was real, and it happened. She was wearing the same thing as every other nurse that I saw. I was in that hospital for 3 days, and didn't see her again.
This happened around 2006, when I was 11 years old. My cousin Aaron was spending the week with my sister and I over summer vacation. At some point during the week, my mom decided to take us all to McDonald's. We ordered and took our food to the back of the McDonald's to sit at a table connected to one of those super long booths along the wall nearest to the bathrooms. Sitting on the same booth, but a few tables down, was an older man sitting by himself. He was probably in his 60s, a bit overweight, balding, and had huge lens 80s style glasses on. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt with gray sweatpants. When we first walked in, I noticed him, but he kept his head down and didn't seem to pay any attention to us, so I kind of blew him off and almost forgot that he was there. My mom had my brother in his car seat by the table and was feeding him French fries. He must have either choked or got sick because he started throwing up all over the place. My mom grabbed him and rushed into the bathroom with him, followed by my sister to help. Aaron and I were left alone at the table. All of a sudden, the old dude looks over at us and starts trying to have a conversation with us. It started with the casual, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" And then he said something about hoping my brother was okay. So we politely responded, thinking that's all that he wanted to say. But then he immediately started getting weird. He asked our ages, which we told him. And then he started asking our names and where our moms worked. So, being kids, we told him that also. The man then looked down at his phone and said that our mom had just texted him saying they would be a while in the bathroom and that he was supposed to bring us home because it was getting late. Although I knew my mom had never even talked to this man once. So even as a kid, I knew something was off. The man then grabbed our hands and said we should hurry. At this point, we were practically being dragged outside. We got outside, and this man started leading us into an old, run-down white van. He opened the back door and said that we could stay in there for the ride. Luckily, just then, some younger guy had spotted us and instantly went over and told the manager what was going on. As this was happening, my mom and my sister also came out of the bathroom, saw what was going on, and screamed while running outside to us. At this point, we hadn't gotten in the van yet, but the man was trying to push us in. Now hearing my mom's screams, I instantly started pushing back, trying to keep myself from entering. The guy quickly gives up as the manager and my mother are fast approaching. The guy gets in the driver's seat and steps on it with his back door still open. My mom was still yelling at us, and we started crying. We didn't know what to think. To this day, this experience still horrifies me. I don't know why me and my cousin were stupid enough to go along with what this guy was saying, but I'm just glad my mom showed up when she did.
I started work as a mailman a few months ago, and just last week, I had an extremely bad experience. There's this one house, every time I deliver there, I see a person watch me through their window, and I mean every single time. I had always chalked this up to be an elderly person who has nothing better to do, and after a while of it happening, it didn't freak me out as much. One day, though, I had to finish delivering mail on another carrier's route that had an emergency and had to stop early. When I was finished with theirs, I had to finish my own. As I made it to this one particular house where the person watched me every day, I saw that they were not there at the window. This made me happy, but also kind of made me nervous for some reason. I dropped the mail into their slot and continued on. I had 3 more houses before I had to return to my truck to grab all the mail for the next street. When I got back to the truck, I saw a weird-looking lady standing under the streetlight behind it. She looked like she was on drugs. She had stains all over her clothing. When she smiled at me, I noticed that she was missing teeth. She then said hello. I said it back and started gathering the mail for the next street. I couldn't see her as I did this, and I felt like she was walking up behind me. I turned around, and she was indeed closer than she was before. Standing in the street, I asked her if she needed something, and she said, "No." I then said back, "Okay, well, I'm going to continue on. Have a good day." With all the mail ready to go, I closed the back door, made sure it was all locked up, and started walking. I felt relieved to be walking away from this crazy-looking woman. I delivered to about 6 houses when I noticed the woman standing next to a truck in the shadows. She was following me. I'm sure that she thought that I couldn't see her there. I continued on, and after every other house, I saw that she was keeping up and trying to hide, and this was so creepy. There was nobody else around, and I felt like she would attack me at any moment. I delivered the mail to another house, and sure enough, when I walked back to the sidewalk, I could see her standing in a shadow by a big tree across the street. I decided I could not continue my night like this, and walked over to her. She stiffened up when I approached her, and I said, "Why in the hell are you following me?" She didn't respond, and instead made my heart sink as she let out a noise only a crazy person would make. A noise like she was scared of me, but it sounded really odd. She then ran away. She was definitely on some kind of drugs, and the next day when I came to that house where I would always see somebody there watching me through the window, she was there, and I know that it was her.